Welcome to this edition of Diligence Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, and I'll be your host for today's show. Today, it's always a pleasure to be back at the New York Stock Exchange overlooking the trading floor. And today we're going to be talking about ways that a board can focus and cut through the noise. And joining me to have that discussion is Stephen Brown, who's the Senior Advisor with KPMG's Board Leadership Center. Welcome back, Stephen.
Well, happy to be here. Thank you.
So, I thought you were the perfect person with your investor background and your board experience, and me with my executive background and sitting in the boardroom. I thought we'd be a great twosome to sort of analyze the current situation about what's going on with boards today. You know, there's a ton of noise flying around, both for the corporation and the boardroom. And I thought that maybe you and I could sort of recommend some logical steps to make sure that boards could focus. I know we're not perfect, but I think we can provide some good things to help both them and the company be successful. And when I say noise, I don't want to necessarily say that noise is a problem,
right?
Okay? Because noise could be investor and societal ESG pressures. It could be workforce challenges. It could be rising rates, our economic woes. Could be all those things that have to be managed. They're important, and it's important to manage them to be successful. But we want to talk about the sustainable success. In other words, what a board has to do, for long-term success, which is really the critical part. And that is rising above the noise, or as they say, rising above the trees, and taking a look at the corporation and saying, is management and this organization on the right path? So I'm going to let you go first, okay? And why don't you talk about what you might suggest to sort of overwhelm directors to make sure that they can cut through the noise.
Sure, and you're absolutely right. There is a lot out there. So my very first point is, I'll borrow from Churchill and others, keep calm and let's carry on. And understand that as stewards of the company, you're still responsible for the oversight of strategy, the oversight of risk, the oversight of compliance, particularly compliance of a mission-critical operations. The difference today is that although corporate laws and fiduciary duties haven't changed all that much, what has changed is that you have an increased number of engaged and informed stakeholders. Those stakeholders also have very different definitions, or sometimes competing definitions, of what they want out of the corporation, including the very fact that we know from the Edelman Trust Index that people trust businesses, and they trust business to do things to fix societal issues that they don't necessarily trust or don't think other institutions will do, like the government or religion, what have you. And lastly, most importantly, I think, the inputs that we call labor, and intangibles, other intangibles, culture, IP, turns out to be extraordinarily valuable to the output, short-term and long-term of the company, versus 50 years ago. So hard assets 50 years ago, we could look at, we can measure, we could talk about that's the value of the company. Today, it's these softer assets, which include labor, human capital, intangibles, IP. So what to do about that? The very first thing, with all the noises out there, keep calm and carry on, is for a board to absolutely demand clarity and alignment on when someone, service provider, management team, CEO, says ESG. Really define what ESG and purpose means to you as a company. You must do that first, because ESG is a great topic sentence, but you need the rest of the paragraph. When someone says ESG, you have to really define what that means and what they're after, and for the board to understand and get alignment on what are those 3 to 5 environmental and or social issues that really affect our long-term productivity, our long-term value. So my fight on ESG is that it's not going away, and I'm not saying ignore it. I'm saying just go a little bit deeper. Don't let anyone get away with just saying ESG and then continuing the conversation. What do they mean by that? What do we mean by that? And when you get alignment on that, it's going to really help drive how you focus.
Yeah, great point, because all the research shows that there's still a gap between shareholder expectations for ESG and the company incorporating that into their strategy, to their compensation plan, et cetera. But you can't, it's so encompassing that you have to define it.
Right.
I'm with you on
Absolutely.
that. So I'm going to take a little different tack. One of the things I think a director could do, and this probably gets to the culture of a company, is I'm a big believer that employees all the way down, particularly to customer facing, have to understand the corporate values and the corporate goals and how they fit in to the success of that formula. So if I were a director, and this is shortcutting a lot,
Sure.
but if I was a director, I'd want to know, first of all, I want to make sure that that's part of any training program or bringing anybody in, okay? And then I'd want to know, I'd go down and I might test the different levels within the organization to see who understands the corporate values and the corporate goals and ask them how they fit into the success of the company. I think it would tell a lot. When I think of companies that do a great job with this, that's evident as soon as the customer walks in the door, one, which interestingly is not a public company, but certainly acts like one, is Chick-fil-A. Okay? They're, no matter what store you go in, no matter what they do a great job. And if you stopped any of those people, they could recite that. Another that we're all familiar with is Southwest. Now, Southwest has taken a hit like all airlines have, through the pandemic. But there's no question that their employees, if you pulled somebody aside, understands what the goals are and what the corporate values are. And if you have that, that affects decision making, and it should give you comfort that things are moving in a good direction. Okay.
And corporate values are one of those things that is absolutely in the domain of the board. And to understand how the employees at all ranks think about those values and effectuate that in their business. Many companies, they will have very lofty value statements, but when you ask someone to repeat it, they're so long. They can get through 2 of them, maybe if they're good 3, but they can't get 4, 5, 6, and 7. That tells you something. That means it's impossible for them to actually articulate how they effectuate 4, 5, 6, and 7. So that's something really, this focus on corporate purpose is soft, but it actually really means something. And it is the domain of those who are stewards of the company, which is the boardroom.
Yeah, I think we've finally gotten to the point, though, that people recognize that culture is not soft.
Right.
Okay, hopefully that's the case. So back to you.
Well, I would say the other thing is when we think about what the board can do today to really focus is I talk about being fit for purpose, for board members being fit for purpose, for the board at this time, and also management. What I mean by that, if we look at studies we've done at KPMG, other folks have done it, other academic institutions, when they've asked board members, how do you feel about your board? Just about all of them, a very significant percentage, say there's at least one board member sitting on my board who shouldn't be there, which I call the sort of full faith and credit of the activist constitution. and they will tell you that's why we're here to sort of get them out. And that's not necessarily practical. What's practical is for boards to really think about, do we have the right skill set in this boardroom today? They may have been right 5 years ago, but today and where we're going, do we have the right skill set and do what's needed to be done with that skills matrix, with that deep understanding of using board evaluations and peer evaluations of the board to figure out if we have the right skill set in the room. And the same in terms of management. What we saw in 2020, with everything that 2020 brought us, right? The pandemic, supply issues, George Floyd, and in the United States, racial unrest. Not everyone who had a title that said what they did was the right person to actually execute the job at that moment. So I always talk to board members about, ignore the title. Is the right skill set within management to get the job done, and have a conversation about it. Doesn't mean that you're gonna kick everyone out, but it may be folks need particular training and to up those skills to do what's needed today in today's environment.
Well, you'd like to believe that if evaluations were effective, that you would have that refreshment, okay? You would have the right skill sets. But you have to believe, and I'm surprised investors aren't all over this when you see some of the statistics out there. You have to believe that people are not having the tough conversations. And that goes back to board leadership.
Right.
You know, board leadership should say, yes, we want to be collegial, this is good, but in the end, this is a business, okay? And that seat is very valuable real estate. And if it's not being occupied by somebody that can contribute to the success, it's not the kind of thing that you say, I'm going to let them hang around.
Right.
That you have to get somebody in that has that skill set. So, great point.
Absolutely.
So my last one
Right.
is I want to talk about sort of balancing major constituencies. So 25 years ago, I had a program where I worked with boards on balancing customers, employees, and shareholders, okay? And I used to show how favoring any one of those at the expense of the other would take it out of bounds. For example, if you didn't pay employees sufficiently and gave that money just to the shareholders, eventually customer service would falter, okay? Or you'd have turnover. Well, who does that affect? That affects the customers because now customer service isn't efficient. And so a director actually here's the opportunity to rise above the trees, okay, and take a look at the organization and say, are we in balance? Today, that's called stakeholder stuff. And they've added the community and suppliers and whatever to that formula on looking at that. I still think the core of that is customers, employees, and shareholders. But the point is, day to day, you're too close to it.
Right.
You got to sort of rise above and look and say, okay, is our organization in balance with this as we move forward?
Well, absolutely, and that indeed is really a great opportunity for the board, because the board, they conceptually and literally are above the trees when it comes to they're not in their day to day, and they can provide management with that input as to what they see at their own companies or other boards they sit on, and to really have that North Star there. I was just in a boardroom last week where the question was asked, so how do we balance these constituencies? And they were thinking through what is called CO activism. How do they speak out on social issues? And so the question was, so how do we balance all these different constituencies? And I smiled and said, well, to me, that's business. That's the absolute secret sauce, is figuring out when and where and how much you balance these constituencies. And if I knew that, I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. Now, that's really what business is about. To use a baseball analogy, every professional baseball player would love to know if you're going to throw a fastball the next pitch. Because if they do, it's going to go out the park and you hit a home run. Now, that's baseball. It's figuring out and guessing right and doing the right thing here. Same thing with boards, is figuring out how to balance constituencies, and there are times that you may have to prioritize one or the other. Boards do that all the time in management teams. Every year, they get retained earnings and figure out whether to put it in R&D, pay people more, give a dividend to shareholders. This is done day in, day out. So my message is that you do this already. It's just more focused now, and there's probably more at stake now, but you've done it before. You have to do it the same way in this environment.
So, Stephen, I have this feeling that if left to us, we could come up with other things and spend quite a bit of time probably sharing, what it is. But certainly, I hope this was helpful to our audience, and I want to thank you, as always, for taking the time and joining me today and sort of sharing our wisdom.
It's always a pleasure.
Yeah. And that will conclude this episode of Diligence Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take another look at a critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.